Hey, this is Gary.
This is Mike.
And Daniel. We're not professionals. We're just three addicts sharing our experiences, strength, and hope regarding recovery.
Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other addicts and to practice these principles in our lives.
Welcome to another episode of the 12th Step Podcast. This is Daniel.
And this is Gary.
And this is Mike.
And we're back. And we're actually in the same room.
It's so nice. In person, Mike.
Good to see you all, and good to be seen.
Yes.
It's good to be here.
And we might see some interesting behavior from Mike.
Only because in the hour before we started the podcast, you pissed me off sufficiently that you may see some behavior.
It's going to be a fun episode. Let's just leave it at that. No, it is good. It's good to be back. It's good to talk about some topics. Topic that I have tonight is something that I came up with just from conversations with other individuals as well as my own sponsees, and I thought it would be very good to talk about on the show. I didn't come up with a great whimsical title, but basically I've read a couple articles about this, and studies show that there's a 90-second window that our urges last. Like when you're hungry or you have that urge to go look at porn or something like that to feed into your addiction, it's a 90-second window. And, you know, a lot of people are probably going to say, well, it lasts longer than that. But the problem is that 90 seconds, if you think about something else that prolongs that, it continues another 90 seconds and another 90 seconds.
So allowing that thought to exist and harbor those thoughts and feelings, it just extends the
correct
the longer 90 seconds.
Yes. So what they say in that article, and what I found when talking to other people, is if you can learn to sit in that urge for that 90 seconds, not act on it, it dissipates. And as long as you don't allow another thought to continue that, you can go on your way. But if that another thought comes up, you got to sit in that again for another 90 seconds. And those thoughts could be something like, looking at that doesn't hurt me, or, but I really want to look at that, or, but if I just keep looking, or this isn't going to hurt anyone. It's those thoughts that, re-trigger that urge cycle over and over. And that's what really is going on. And it's not really about willpower, powering through it. It's just sitting in that emotion. What is causing those thoughts to come up, and then riding that wave out.
That's fascinating. Partly because I think I've stumbled onto a few things of my own that literally, I think I literally just tripped over them, to be honest with you. So, and I think during this podcast it'd be fun to share some of those things. But I'm interested in the research. Where did you read these articles? Some of the authors of the articles that you read?
It's online. I didn't grab those sightings, but I'll look for those.
But that does sound about right. I mean, that from my own experience, I think I've experienced those kinds of moments where if I can just literally. And I think there's a couple pieces to it. If I can understand the source of where it's coming from, 9 times out of 10, when I think about those moments where I'm having that urge or to do something, to think about something, to do whatever, 9 times out of 10, if I can trace it back far enough, I can see the anxiety that's been building in me.
I just found it. So it was on Psychology Today.
Oh, wow.
So it's the 90-second rule that builds self-control is the title of the article.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Huh. Who's the author?
Let me just pull that
Be
up.
wise to let our listeners know who to credit for.
Dr. Jill Taylor.
So Dr. Jill Taylor is suggesting that literally, if we can survive 90 seconds of some of this onslaught of thinking, that perhaps we could work our way through.
Yeah, I mean, even in my own look. Kind of remembering back, it hits you hard, and it's just like, oh yeah, I want to do it. But as I've gotten more recovery, and I think this is also something that we've learned in Sage, the further we can step away from that line,
slow it down,
the less likely we are to step over it and relapse. And I think this 90-second rule really applies to that. By slowing it down, I mean, a minute and a half is a long time.
It is.
And if you can sit in there and not step over the line, more than likely in that minute and a half, by using breathing exercises or whatever your tool is, you can get to a point like, why do I need that? I really don't need that. maybe I'll go for a walk or do all these other positive, outer circle items that keep us away from that line.
But do you know what? There's a great deal of utility in also knowing that that the situation or the urges that you're feeling are a temporary thing.
Yeah.
That it is transient, that it's going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you can apply something like 90 seconds, a minute and a half can be a long time. But also, a minute and a half is not that long a time.
That's
correct.
exactly true story.
You can. And so knowing that you can put a clock on it, it's like, well, I can sit here for 90 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I can, it's easy to break that down and then start doing other things. And it's also really useful to watch yourself do it, and realize, okay, this is what I'm doing. All right, I probably have another 75 seconds of this,
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's even more interesting, because I remember several conversations in Sage where someone would start, well, I started here, and I felt the urge, so I went to go look at this. Maybe it was Sports Illustrated, and then I got to the swims, glancing through the swimsuit issue, or I started on TikTok, and that really coincides with that 90-second window.
That's
because
right.
they get there and they're riding through that urge, and then they go to another place because that urge gets stronger and stronger. But what if we do it in reverse, where instead of allowing that, we sit in that and go the opposite direction? Because 90 seconds is a small window that we can move either way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going to share a couple of things that I discovered. This may come as a huge shock to you and to the rest of the listeners, but I was not a very good student in school. I don't know why that was. Just I was not.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why I was not is because there were times when I would take home my homework that I just simply didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And I had this, I'd be out playing sports or hanging out with friends or doing whatever, and that thought would come to my mind of, Mike, you need to get your homework done.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to myself, I don't want to think about this right now.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough,
You didn't.
your mind has a real capacity to say, oh my word, he doesn't want to think. So, and it clears the stage.
Oh, yeah.
It's gone completely, and it's gone for quite a while. And I'm amazed at how even thinking about it, like, what was I just thinking about? It's gone. It really is kind of gone. And I think this ties in really nicely. It tied in as a really nice tool for my own recovery. And then also it ties in with this idea of 90 seconds. I remember one time having a moment where I was feeling amorous. I was getting worked up and thinking, what is going on? I'm experiencing this rush of emotion and this rush of sensation. And I thought, and I verbalized it. If you were to look at me while I was going through this, you would have thought to yourself that he's talking to himself, because it came out almost audible.
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to think about this right now.
Yeah.
And I was amazed it went away. And I think that I found that to be really, really helpful in some of these moments where we really are struggling, where we've had this rush of sensation of, oh my word, I have this urge to act out. I've seen something I want to, something stressing me out, all those sorts of things. And this tool has been really, really helpful in my toolbox. So I connect with this author who's talking about the fact that we've got this 90-second thing that's going on. Because if I can do something that interjects that emotional moment and bring it down to a level that I can tolerate, I can get through that.
Yeah.
The second thing that I think I would suggest is that whatever it is you're trying to get out of thinking, you have to replace it with something that you do want to think about. And that comes from, in my situation, an awful lot of reading. I love to read. I've got my nose in several books all the time. I'm working right now on a Brene Brown book that I just absolutely love. She's a great author and does a great job in this space. But I have a whole lot of stuff that I do that I consider to be religious books that I deal with, that I read a lot in. So I've got 5 or 6 books going at any given time. And I have my core things that I like to think about. So when I say to myself, I don't want to think about that right now, then what do I want to think about? Because that suddenly fills the space and the gap where there's no more room for this sort of thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those two things combined have been incredibly helpful in my own recovery. And I think that's useful as we start contemplating this whole idea that, if you could just do something in that middle of that 90 seconds, you could really upend your trajectory as far as acting out behaviors.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I remember you mentioning, that back when I was in Sage and you were one of the mentors. And that's something, when I really got serious, I would do. I didn't always speak out loud. There'd be times where, I'd be in a group or a crowd or at work and I'd say it, mentally. But it definitely didn't have as much power as saying it, vocalizing it. But it still did work. Just by saying, no, I don't want to think about this, or nope, I don't want that in my mind right now.
I want to be dealing with that right now.
Yeah, and then doing something else that's a positive thing really counteracted that. And I think that's what really gave me a huge leap, and because I've found when working with my sponsees, they're just like, it just keeps spinning in my head. And that's because they're not doing anything to stop that spinning cycle.
Right.
And I think that's what this 90-second window allows for us, is to stop that.
Are you guys familiar with the what is it? The CBT triangle, cognitive behavior therapy triangle?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've discussed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who might not be familiar with it, I want you to imagine a triangle. Okay. And on each point of the triangle, you have thoughts on one point, feelings on one point, or emotions, and action, behavior.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And then there's a little arrow that goes in both directions to each corner. So your behavior can affect your thoughts, and your behavior can affect your feelings, and
we
your
have
feelings.
double arrows. They
Yeah,
can go back
double
and
arrows
forth.
connecting, so that any one of those points on the triangle can be affected and can affect the other two.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, so what this topic that Daniel's brought up has kind of reminded me that you get into this cycle where you might have an urge or a feeling,
Right.
an emotion, whatever it might be, and then that can trigger thoughts, or that can trigger behaviors, or a little bit of both, which will create a reinforcing kind of a cycle. So what I've been thinking about while you guys have been talking about this is you can slow it down and identify, okay, which one of these three things is affecting me right now? Am I having an urge? Is it a feeling? Or is it a thought that's popped into my head? Or is there a behavior, like maybe am I going through some kind of ritual that's triggered something?
Sure.
And then kind of break that down, and then realize that you can use the other two to affect it. So if you're feeling a certain way, you can use behavior and thoughts to change it.
Yeah.
If you have a certain thinking,
Wow, I've never thought of that, but that's
you can
true.
use your feelings and your actions to change it.
Yeah, this comes in real handy. I have a picture of it, like with the thoughts. You can start asking yourself, what thoughts do I have when I feel this emotion? Like when you're starting to feel stuff.
Right.
Under feelings, where in my body do I feel this emotion?
Yes.
I've found, like, when I'm feeling very anxious, it's generally in my chest or in my back. If I'm upset, it's generally in my neck and shoulders. It's kind of interesting. But if you can start focusing on that, you're now focusing on those things instead of the addiction or the urge.
Right. So this is
and the behavior is what we do affects how I think and feel.
So this is something I've been working on a little bit lately. Is this kind of model, and I've made this fascinating discovery about myself. Okay, so like you said, where is it in my body? I feel anxiety in my chest. I feel, and then I found if there's something else that causes a similar feeling, it will bring on board an emotion that's incongruent with the situation. Okay, so if for whatever reason I'm hurting in my chest or something's going on there, suddenly. Now, for me, when I would get really, really anxious, or in my worst places, it would hurt in my chest. And it would be I feel very
sharp or
depressed.
something.
Yeah. And it would just manifest itself like that. So then I've noticed that if I've done something, like I've been working out, or I've done something that kind of mimics that feeling, that if I'm not aware of it, those previous things that I've associated with that feeling in my body, the emotions will start to pile onto it. And I'll think, man, why do I feel so melancholy? Because things are great. And it's like, oh, it's because I'm hurting, and that's how it manifests itself.
Wow.
Well, it's amazing how our brain links those things up.
Yeah.
It's like, I hurt my shoulder, and then I started very similar. I had those same type of emotions coming up because working with the IFT stuff, there's apparently a part that resides there, and anytime it's activated, my shoulder just aches. And then when I hurt my shoulder, my body's like, oh, it's hurting there, so we must be feeling these things.
Yeah.
And something's going on similar to that. And And that's why you have to kind of stop and, think, okay, where am I feeling this and what's going on in my mental universe? Because it could be, no, nothing's triggering that, but my brain is defaulting to those settings because that's what the neural pathways we've created over all these years.
Brain is just naughty. Let's just be clear about that. The brain is naughty. I mean,
It can
in this
be.
constant energy, this constant effort of being efficient, it creates these connections
See-
that are so completely wrong.
So then the key
I
is
just
to,
think they're
to-
cheat codes.
Yeah. So then the key really is to begin to recognize that this is what my brain does,
Yes.
and this is why
Yes.
it does it. So now, how can I use this superpower for good? How can I leverage that to my
Right.
to my advantage? And another thing that I've learned that's kind of along these things is you'll find one of these things that works. Okay, and if you can start pairing things. You can start pairing things together. You'll create reward systems around them. So, for example, let's say there's a task that you have to do that you don't want to do it. If you can somehow pair it with something that you do enjoy, then it'll piggyback, and then the reward, the reward behavior or the reward pathway will piggyback onto that, and that's the same way that addictions develop. It's just in
in reverse,
in
in
yeah,
a positive,
in-
in a
yeah.
positive state.
We're just rewriting the code,
Yeah.
I'm gonna
or
actually-
the direction.
I think that's fascinating because I'm noticing something in relation to my phone. I had a very distinct path of how I reached the internet and
Yeah.
the internet emails and things like that would lead to my acting out behavior. It always started with sports. I'd always run to an ESPN or something like that to find sports scores, things like that. And then it would go to the news. And, of course, I would highlight all those articles out there about somebody who's been arrested over, of all things, a sex addiction of some type or sexual behavior, And I would read those stories. But very quickly then it would accelerate to, okay, now, and it wasn't very long until my brain just knew that we start here, we go there, and we go there, and then we end up here. That was my acting out behavior. I mean, locked and loaded. That's how it went. And what's been fascinating about that now is that I've obviously removed the internet from my phone and all those pathways and everything else. In fact, the phone I'm carrying around is one that's not even carried any longer, not being supported at all by Apple. And what's interesting about that is that the start of that neural pathway still exists. I've removed everything associated with it. I've removed the news stories. I've removed I've removed all the sports apps. I've removed all of that stuff. And I find myself, even when I wake up in the middle of the night, the first thing I do is grab for that phone. Even though there's nothing there, there's nothing physically to look at. I mean, I can look at some stock information, but it's not the same thing. And so I'll roll back over, try and go to sleep, and then wake up again. And the first thing I'm doing is going for this phone, and I'm thinking, I am in a memory lock.
Yeah, you need
That
to do
is-
something about that.
Yeah, I got to figure that out because what that means is that at the next time if I get a phone upgrade and I have the internet on there, that I will always be in that moment, and I got to figure that out.
Yeah,
So
that's
I would say don't put it on your nightstand. Put it on your dresser.
I do that as well.
Okay.
I do that as well. I have another room that I put it in, and I've tried that, but my problem is because of work, I end up getting contacted even crazy hours.
Sure.
And then I'm up and running to the other room to find
Yeah.
out what's going on with it.
So, but the other thing that you could do is you could disrupt
Disrupt the cycle.
The cycles. So one of the things that I had to do along the same line was I found that when I would get ready in the morning, it would be very activating because it was like this ritual that I was performing.
That's right. That's right.
And I had to change the order of how I got
Yeah.
ready in the morning because I
Yeah.
still had to get ready in the morning.
Yep.
Right.
But I had to change the order in which I did it so that it wouldn't be a problem, and now it's not.
Interesting.
So what you're describing is a little bit of like, being a dry drunk. Yeah, you're not acting out.
Right.
But all of the
You're
all
still
of the
going-
stuff is
all
still
of,
there.
it's still there just waiting.
You're
Yeah.
still walking into the bar. They're putting a glass in front of you, but it's empty.
Yeah. So but
And then I leave.
And then you leave.
But I think you're wise in recognizing that about yourself and then doing that. So to bring this back around, you have this urge that is going to last for 90 seconds. And now we have all of these great, and in fact, if you stop and think about all the tools that we've talked about, your fire driller, if you do this, you call this person, right? It's that same cognitive behavior triangle. I've
Right.
got this urge. Here's this behavior or these thoughts that I can use to combat that. Here's, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And it happens in that 90-second window. Like, oh man, I'm really feeling the urge. I'm going to call my sponsor.
Right.
I mean, that's disrupting that.
Right.
I'm going to go for a walk. That's disrupting that.
But do you know what? It's such a good idea. I'm kind of excited about, the thing that we were talking about is realizing where it manifests itself in your body and what that feels like. And then taking a minute and thinking, okay, what's causing that? Is that really how I feel, or am I just, did I work out today, or did I hurt my shoulder? And it just is,
That's
it's very
fascinating.
fascinating.
Everything seems to manifest itself in one spot, which is always right here in the back of my neck.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's now connected to my diabetic behaviors associated with that. So if my sugar's high, back of my neck. My sugar's low, back of my neck.
Mm-hmm.
My acting out behaviors and I get worked up about something, back of my neck. When I get flushed, I mean, literally, you can almost see the color go out of my face, and it manifests itself in the back of my neck. It's almost in the exact same spot every single time for all of it.
How's the back of your neck right now?
Well,
It hurts.
I mean,
Because my sugar's on the rise.
I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, that's where a lot of, our blood pressure
Yeah,
and that going up to our brain and stuff like that. If your blood pressure is low, you're not getting enough
That's right.
blood up to your brain, so you're probably not thinking appropriately. So it's not surprising your body's identified, hey, when there's a problem in this area, where
Something's
I
up.
need to warn you because we're in a danger area now that we've changed all these behaviors. And that's probably so loud that you're probably missing the other ones that
Right.
are going on right now.
Right.
Yeah.
The big one right now, like I said, is I'm trying to monitor sugar levels, and so I run to my phone. If I start feeling it in the back of my neck, am I high or am I low?
Yeah.
And now I've got alarms on my phone attached to a monitor on my arm that's going, me, whatever. And that's all fine and dandy, but I feel it. I feel it long before those things ever go off. I'm going, oh my goodness, I'm going too high, or whoa, I'm going too low.
But it's interesting that by paying attention to what your body's telling you, that you begin to recognize that,
That's
and
right.
then can start
Well-
acting before it's a thing. And it's the same. It's exactly the same principles. It's exactly the same principles that you need to correct your addictive behavior.
Yes. Yes.
It's the same principles that underlie all that kind of stuff. It's kind of interesting. So you remember a couple months ago on the podcast, I made myself accountable that I was going to that I needed to take better care of myself
I
physically.
do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we were going to follow up on that.
Yeah.
It's time.
It's time to
Let's
follow
go ahead
up.
and follow up on
Okay.
that.
So I, my wife and I started a program at the beginning of April of this year. And we've been working really hard, and I've lost about 35 pounds.
Good
Congrats.
for you.
Yeah. And I've also, as part of this journey, I've went and had all the appropriate diagnostic tests for somebody of my age, and so I've made arrangements for all that, or are in the process of doing it. In fact, before the show, I mentioned visiting the cardiologist today,
Right.
Yeah.
and everything is fine. But my grandfather had heart problems, and my father had heart problems, and so I thought, I'm going to get this taken care of, and then we'll create a baseline that I can watch as I get older. So all of that is going really, really well. And the reason I bring it up is I found it interesting that the principles of changing your attitude toward food
Yes.
that this program and my wife and I are looking at are exactly the same
Yes,
things
they are.
that I did in recovery, and which really sold me on the idea.
Yes, partly because, and I think our common counselor has illuminated this multiple times, that our food addiction and our acting out behaviors are related in ways that are really just unbelievably parallel.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's the exact same sort of. It's almost the exact same muscle memory.
Oh yeah,
It literally is.
In fact, it astonishes me because it teaches me all the same things, and it's kind of funny. It says, so it's like, okay, now if you get an urge to do this, you create a little support group, and you follow. It's the same stuff.
I mean, I'm really curious to know, if we could have a time machine, with your acting out behavior in the past, how much of that was actually triggered by your blood sugar levels?
Good question.
Because you always mentioned that immediately after you went to McDonald's and
all places.
ate,
All
and that
places.
probably you just gorged yourself, and that probably spiked it back up.
I always attribute it to the fact that McDonald's is just such raunchy food,
Well,
and
yeah.
it was sort of this self-loathing kind of moment.
I mean,
what was I
it was-
thinking
it was-
there, Mike? I mean, you just spent how
Yeah.
much money to do what with
Yeah,
who?
it
Oh,
probably
let's
was
go
a
to
little bit of
McDonald's.
that too. That was probably the emotional connection, but probably the physical response
Yeah.
is like, well, I feel like garbage. But hey, I also need to get my
Yeah, I got to get my
levels up,
nutrients
and
leveled up.
because your blood sugar is low. You maybe made improper decision making.
Yeah.
And do you know it also goes back to that? It also goes back to the HALT acronym.
Yeah.
Like if you're you
Yes.
stop and you ask yourself, okay, am I hungry? Am I angry?
Yeah.
Am I lonely? It's the same thing.
It's the
Yeah.
You're
exact
just
same
taking
thing.
an inventory. Where am I at physically? What am I
Yep.
feeling? Why
Yeah.
am I feeling it? And then what do I need to do to
That's
take care
right.
of it?
It brings up the point over and over and over again that our addictive behavior really is telling us something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When we have a sensation of feeling amorous or like, oh my word, I just had this overwhelming surge of a desire to act out or do something or look at something or whatever, 9 times out of 10, it's our body saying something to us.
Yeah.
Mike, you need to listen to this. And I was just simply misdiagnosing it all the
Yep.
time. I just simply was just forgetting it. It's the same. I remember Shane telling us, or a common counselor telling us that we'd wake up in the morning with
Yeah.
with morning wood,
Yeah.
and that that sensation of having of that feeling, and because it was the exact same sensation of when I was turned on with the girl I was dating
Yeah.
last night or whatever, and him saying, no, that's really your body telling you it's time to get up and go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, what?
Yep. Nope. I
And yet it's
remember
the
the
exact
same
same
thing.
sensation.
Yeah.
And yet, interestingly enough, that when you put that in practice, I'm amazed how you can go back to bed and not worry about that stuff anymore,
Yeah.
So it's the body's really fascinating. And when you start experiencing the kinds of things that recovery can really provide, when you start, when out of the blue, you get one of these sensations that you haven't had in a long time and go, what is going on in my life? Oh my word, now I see it.
And it's also it also makes sense to me that the more I explore getting myself healthy in all of these different
Yes.
aspects, that it's using all of these same kind of principles. So once you start mastering those and applying them to other areas of your life, it doesn't surprise me that just how addiction, it's a downward spiral.
That's
where
right.
Yeah.
That recovery is an upward one, and your whole world, your whole life elevates.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. And you find answers in places that you had no idea.
Yeah.
That, in fact, you probably didn't even know were questions.
Yeah.
So-
Absolutely.
That's fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
And it only took us 90 seconds.
Yes.
It
90
really only took
seconds.
us 90 seconds to discuss it. So
All right. Well, we're out of time for this episode.
how does that happen?
But the nice thing is, we do have another episode that correlates with this subject that we'll talk about. So we'll follow up with that.
Ooh, a teaser.
Yes, a teaser.
Dun, dun,
So they
dun.
got to come back.
That's right. You got to come back.
All right.
First of all,
Yes.
before we sign off,
Sure.
just want to thank our listeners for listening.
Yes.
And then secondly, reach out.
Yes.
Reach out to us. Hit us up on social media. Tell us what you think of the podcast, and let us know if you have questions.
And you know what? Thanks for sticking with us. It's been a minute since we put out a new episode.
It
really
has.
has,
It's
yeah.
been a very challenging and busy summer.
Yes, it
All of
has.
us, our jobs have upgraded.
And I
to-
actually hold you two responsible for that.
Okay.
I mean, I just do.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough. And do you know what? I hold you two responsible for it, and I'm sure that Mike holds us two responsible. So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Okay. Which one of us is the thoughts, and which one of us is the feelings, and which one of us is the behavior?
I've yet to see the movie. I don't know.
we need to figure out how we're gonna. All right.
Who is thoughts, who is emotion, and who is behavior?
I want to be.
Or do we take it in turns?
I mean, I think we all swap around, but you
It's
know,
like sharing a brain. I don't
Yeah.
want it. You take it.
yeah, I don't know if I'd want to be labeled.
Okay. It was just a
No,
little-
I mean it's really interesting. It's to think, okay, where am I at on that triangle?
yeah.
So be mindful of that. Hopefully this information has helped. Like I said, we have another episode that correlates with this. We'll dive into that a little bit more. Maybe that'll give you some tools and thoughts. But until then, this is Daniel saying, find the humility in your recovery.
And this is Gary saying, do the next right thing.
And this is Mike saying, do the work necessary to find the peace that recovery can bring.
It only takes 90 seconds.
That's all.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like this episode, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find us.
As a fellowship of recovering addicts, Sex Addicts Anonymous offers a message of hope to anyone who suffers from sex addiction. Check out saa-recovery.org.